Alright, guys. The Art of War, Chapter 11. The 9 Kinds of Ground. The 9 Kinds of Ground. Master Sun said, "In war, there are 9 kinds of ground. Number 9. 9 kinds of ground. Scattering ground, light ground, strategic ground, open ground, crossroad ground, heavy ground, intractable ground, enclosed ground, death ground. When the feudal lords fight on home territory, that is scattering ground. When the feudal lords fight on home territory, that is scattering ground. When an army enters enemy territory but not deeply, that is light ground. When the ground offers advantage to either side, that is strategic ground. When each side can come and go freely, that is open ground. When the ground borders 3 states and the first to take it has mastery of the empire, that is crossroad ground. When an army enters enemy territory deeply and holds several fortified towns in its rear, that is heavy ground. When an army travels through mountains and forests, cliffs and crags, marshes and fens, hard roads, these are intractable ground. Ground reached through narrow gorges, retreated from by twisting paths where a smaller force of theirs can strike our larger one, that is enclosed ground. Ground reached through narrow gorges, retreated from by twisting paths where a smaller force of theirs can strike our larger one, that is enclosed ground. Ground where mere survival requires a desperate struggle, where without a desperate struggle we perish, that is death ground. On scattering ground do not fight, on light ground do not halt, on strategic ground do not attack, on open ground do not block, on crossroad ground form alliances, on heavy ground plunder, on intractable ground keep marching, on enclosed ground devise stratagems, on death ground fight. The skillful warrior of old could prevent the enemy's vanguard from linking with his rear, large and small divisions from working together, crack troops from helping poor troops, officers and men from supporting one another. The enemy, once separated, could not reassemble, once united, could not act in concert. Could not act in concert. I think it's pronounced concert. When there was some gain to be had, he made a move. When there was none, he halted. To the question, how should we confront an enemy, numerous and well arrayed, poised to attack? My reply is, seize something he cherishes and he will do your will. Speed is the essence of war. Exploit the enemy's unpreparedness. Attack him unawares, take an unexpected route. The way of invasion is this. Deep penetration brings cohesion. Your enemy will not prevail. Plunder fertile country to nourish your men. Cherish your troops, do not wear them out. Nurture your energy, concentrate it. Move your men about, devise stratagems that cannot be fathomed. Throw your men where there is no escape, and they will die rather than flee. Devise stratagems that cannot be fathomed. Men who have faced death can achieve anything. They will give their last drop of strength, officers and men alike. Men who have faced death can achieve anything. They will give their last drop of strength, officers and men alike. Troops in desperate straits know no fear. Where there is no escape, they stand firm. When they have entered deep, they persist. When they see no hope, they fight. They are alert without needing discipline. They act without needing instructions. They are devoted without needing a compact. They are loyal without needing orders. Forbid the consulting of omens. Cast out doubts, and they will go on to the death. Our men have no excess of worldly goods, and yet they do not disdain wealth. They do not expect to live long, and yet they do not disdain long life. On the day they are ordered into battle, they sit up and weep. Wetting their clothes with their tears, they lie down and weep, wetting their cheeks. But throw them where there is no escape, and they will fight with the courage of the heroes, Zhu and Gi. The skillful warrior deploys his troops like the Shuaran snake found on Mount Hang. Strike its head and the tail lashes back. Strike its tail and the head fights back. Strike its belly and both head and tail will attack you. To the question, can an army be like the Shuaran snake? I reply, yes it can. Take the men of Wu and the men of Yu. They are enemies, but if they cross a river in the same boat and encounter a wind, they will help each other like right hand and left. It is not enough to tether horses and to bury chariot wheels. There must be a single courage throughout. This is the way to manage an army. Strong and weak both can serve, thanks to the principle of ground. The skillful warrior directs his army as if it were a single man. He leaves it no choice but to obey. It is the business of the general to be still and inscrutable, to be upright and impartial. He must be able to keep his own troops in ignorance, to deceive their eyes and their ears. So it is the business of the general to be still and inscrutable. Remember that word inscrutable, meaning undecipherable, impossible to figure out. So it is the business of the general to be still and inscrutable, to be upright and impartial, not taking favoritism. It's a good word to teach you, impartial. He must be able to keep his own troops in ignorance, to deceive their eyes and their ears. He changes his ways and alters his plans to keep the enemy in ignorance. He shifts camp and takes roundabout routes to keep the enemy in the dark. He leads his men into battle like a man climbing a height and kicking away the ladder. He leads them deep into the territory of the feudal lords and releases the trigger. He burns his boats, he breaks his pots. He is like a shepherd driving his sheep this way and that. No one knows where he is going. He assembles his troops and throws them into danger. This is the business of the commander. These things must be studied. The variations of the 9 kinds of ground, the advantages of flexible maneuver, the principles of human nature. The way of invasion is this: deep penetration brings cohesion. Shallow penetration brings scattering. When you leave your own territory and lead your men across the border, you enter dire terrain. When there are lines of communication on all 4 sides, you are on crossroad terrain. When you penetrate deeply, you're on heavy terrain. When you penetrate superficially, you are on light terrain. When there are strongholds to your rear and narrow passes in front, you are on enclosed terrain. When there is no way out, you are on death terrain. On scattering ground, we unite the will of our men. On light ground, we keep them connected. On strategic ground, we bring up our rear. On open ground, we see to our defenses. On crossroad ground, we strengthen our alliances. On heavy ground, we ensure continuity of supplies. On intractable ground, we keep on the move. On enclosed ground, we block the passes. On death ground, we demonstrate the desperateness of the situation. It is in the soldier's nature that when surrounded, he resists. When all seems lost, he struggles on. When in danger, he obeys orders. Without knowing the plans of the feudal lords, you cannot form alliances. Without knowing the lie of hills and woods, of cliffs and crags, of marshes and fens, you cannot march. Without using local guides, you cannot exploit the lie of the land. Ignorance of any one of these points is not characteristic of the army of a great king. When the army of a great king attacks a powerful state, he does not allow the enemy to concentrate his forces. He overawes the enemy and undermines his alliances. He does not strive to ally himself with all the other states. He does not foster their power. He pursues his own secret designs, overawing his enemies. Thus he can capture the enemy's cities and destroy the enemy's state. Distribute rewards without undue respect for rules. Publish orders without undue regard for precedent. Deal with the whole army as if it were a single man. Apply them to their task without words of explanation. Confront them with the advantage, but do not explain the danger. Throw them into perilous ground, and they will survive. Plunge them into death ground, and they will live. When a force has fallen into danger, it can snatch victory from defeat. Success in war lies in scrutinizing enemy intentions and going with them. Focus on the enemy, and from hundreds of miles you can kill their general. This is success through cunning. On the day you decide to attack, close the passes, destroy the tallies, break off intercourse with envoys, be firm in the temple council for the execution of your plans. If the enemy opens the door, rush in, seize what he holds dear, and secretly contrive an encounter. Discard rules. Follow the enemy to fight the decisive battle. At first, be like a maiden. When the enemy opens the door, be swift as a hare. Your enemy will not withstand you. All right, chapter 11, the 9 kinds of ground, with commentary. Wang Zi. These are the 9 types of military ground with their advantages and disadvantages. Zhang Yu. There are 9 essential dynamics or potential energies, Shi, of ground or terrain in war. Here the underlying dynamics of ground are discussed, which follows naturally from the previous chapter on its forms. Guiles. One would like to distinguish the 9 kinds of ground from the 6 forms of terrain of chapter 10 by saying that the 6 forms refer to the natural formation or geographical features of the country, while the 9 kinds have more to do with the condition of the army, being situations as opposed to grounds, but it is soon found impossible to carry out the distinction. Both are cross divisions, for in chapter 10 we have deadlocked terrain, a situational category, side by side with enclosed terrain, a geographical category, while in the present chapter there is even greater confusion. Translator. Perhaps the writer wanted there to be 9 kinds of ground, just as there were 9 astrological mansions in the sky, but nothing is very well worked out. Father Amiot remarks, p. 117, it is a general fault of Chinese authors that they repeat the same principle, the same argumentation, the same words several times. As other commentators and translators have pointed out, this particular chapter is long, disorganized and repetitive, and it shows signs of having been put together from disparate fragments, possibly jumbled bamboo strips, as indeed does much of the art of war. Despite this, I have stayed with the accepted text. I think this chapter was good. I love what it says, at least the way it was translated. Master Sun said, in war there are 9 kinds of ground: scattering ground, light ground, strategic ground, open ground, crossroad ground, heavy ground, intractable ground, enclosed ground, death ground. When the feudal lords fight on home territory, that is scattering ground. Cow. Officers and men long for home, and home is close at hand. They scatter easily. Guiles. So-called because the soldiers, being near to their homes and anxious to see their wives and children, are likely to seize the opportunity afforded by a battle and scatter in every direction. Du. Being close to home, they lack the desperate resolve necessary to press forward and find an all too easy place of refuge. Yangtze, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. On scattering ground, troops think of home and refuse to fight. In this case, we must secure our position and lie low, but suppose the enemy attacks some of our small towns, plunders our countryside, prevents us from gathering firewood, cuts our lines of communication, and waits for a moment of weakness to attack us. What should we do then? Master Sun replied, "The enemy has penetrated our territory deeply. He already has many of our towns behind his lines. His officers and men think of their army as their family. They are resolved to fight, whereas our own men are stationed at home. They are too close to home comforts and to their kin. If they form ranks, they do so without conviction. If they fight without the will to win. We must gather men together in large numbers, stock grain, fodder, and silk, fortify towns, and control strategic positions, and meanwhile send out parties of light troops to cut off the enemy's supply lines. When the enemy fails to provoke us, when their supplies fail to arrive, when there is nothing left for them to plunder in the countryside and their men begin to grow weary and hungry, then we can lure them out and defeat them. If we are to engage them in the open, then we must have a favorable dynamic working for us. We must hold some strategic pass and lay an ambush. Otherwise, we must hide in the mist and darkness and take them unawares, catch them in a slack moment. There lies the path to victory." Translator. This passage is one of the 9 extracts from the questions and answers of King He Lu of Wu and Master Sun, quoted at length by the Song Dynasty commentator He Yangtze, and also present in the earlier encyclopedic work Tongdian by the Tang scholar Du Yu. Under each of the 9 categories of ground, see Li Ling 1997 pp 182 through 87 and Ames 1993 pp 199 through 223. Fragments of such questions and answers have also been found among the excavated bamboo strips, and they seem to be an interesting example of an early warring state's art of war accretion and illuminating and relatively simple expansion of the often gnomic sentences of the core text. Similar explanatory accretions, commentaries, and wings became attached at an early stage to other Chinese classics, including that other great gnomic text, the Book of Changes. When an army enters enemy territory but not deeply, that is light ground. Li Quan. It is easy light to retreat from. Du Mu. When an army crosses the border, boats and bridges must be burned to demonstrate to the men that no one is hankering after home. He Yangtze. The king of Wu asked for Master Sun's advice. "We have arrived on light ground. We have just entered enemy territory, and our officers and men still hanker after home. It is hard to advance and easy to retreat. We have no strong terrain behind us, such as a pass or other commanding height, and our men are easily afraid. The commanding general wants to press on, but his officers and men want to retreat. Thus upper and lower ranks are not of one mind. The enemy meanwhile has fortified his cities, has arrayed his troops in good order, and either confronts us or attacks our rear. What should we do?" Master Sun replied, "When troops first arrive in enemy territory, the officers and men are not yet focused on penetrating the terrain. They are not primed for battle. We must not go too close to the enemy's main cities. We must not use his main thoroughfares. Instead, we must present an air of trepidation and hesitation, give the impression of being about to retreat. Meanwhile, select a crack cavalry detachment, send them on ahead secretly, and make off with the enemy's horses and livestock. The rank and file, seeing the success of this advance, will lose their fear. We must then select some of our best foot soldiers and set them in a secret ambush. If the enemy comes, we must attack them without hesitation. If they do not come, they can withdraw without doing battle." Master Sun added, "On light ground, such as you have described, we should select some of our bravest men and set an ambush on an important thoroughfare. Then, when we retreat, the enemy will pursue us and we can attack them. When the ground offers advantage to either side, that is strategic ground." Translator. Literally, ground worth struggling for. Zhang. Cao, guiles, ground on which the few and the weak can defeat the many and the strong. Li Quan. A key position such as the neck of a pass. Whoever occupies it first will have the victory. Du Mu, guiles, contestable or strategically important ground. Failure to occupy such a strategic position can lead to disaster, as in the case of the army of Lu Guang. When it returned from its triumphant western expedition to Turkestan, AD 385, it was the failure of his would-be opponents to seize control of either one of 2 strategic passes that enabled Lu to defeat them. Guiles. The Thermopylae was strategic ground because the possession of it, even for a few days only, meant holding the entire invading army in check and thus gaining invaluable time. Cf. Master Wu's Art of War, Chapter 5. For those who have to fight in the ratio of 1 to 10, There was nothing better than a narrow pass. He, Yangzi, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. The king of Wu, like Wu-Tang, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. Suppose the enemy arrives first and holds and defends key positions. Suppose he deploys lightly armed and well-trained troops both offensively and defensively and is prepared for any surprise maneuver from our side. What should we do? Master Sun replied, with strategic ground, it is of paramount advantage to be the first to occupy it. If the enemy has indeed already done this, be cautious, avoid attacking him, lure him out by feigning retreat, raise the standards, sound the drums, and make as if towards some place that he greatly cherishes. Drag firewood along the ground and create a cloud of dust. Confuse his eyes and ears, select some of your best men and lay a secret ambush, and he will be obliged to come to the rescue. Whatever he desires, give him. Whatever he abandons, take. This is how to deal with an enemy who has occupied a strategic position first. If, on the other hand, we are there first and he uses this same strategy against us, then we should select some of our finest troops to defend the position, and simultaneously pursue the enemy with light troops and lay ambushes in defiles and on precipitous terrain. When the enemy engages with us in combat, the ambush will arise on both sides, and we will have total victory. When each side can come and go freely, that is open ground. I'll close the window. Doesn't close all the way. Sorry about my dog. She's annoying. Okay. Just keep concentration. So when the ground offers advantage to either side, that is strategic ground. We read that already. When each side can come and go freely, that is open ground. Cow. Ground covered with a network of roads, guiles, like a chessboard. Open ground, like flat ground, kind of. Dumu. Level, extensive, well-watered ground in which one can come and go, suitable for battle and for building fortifications. He, Yangzi, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. I know that on open ground, we should cut off the enemy's lines and make it impossible for him to move. We should complete our frontier fortifications, destroy his lines of communication, and secure passes and strategic heights. But supposing we do not plan this in advance and he has made preparations, then he will be able to move. But we will be powerless to do so. In such a situation, if the forces on either side are evenly matched in numbers, what should we do? Master Sun replied, if we are unable to move and he can move freely, we should select troops and lay an ambush. Then we maintain our defensive position and make a show of being slack and helpless. Then the enemy will come out and will be taken unawares in our ambush. So we should select troops and lay an ambush. Then we maintain our defensive position and make a show of being slack and helpless. Well, I get, yeah. I'm being cunning. The enemy will come out and will be taken unawares in our ambush. When the ground borders 3 states and the first to take it has mastery of the empire, that is crossroad ground. Mang. An example of this was the small state of Zhang, which was surrounded by the large states of Qi, Chu, and Jin. Guiles. Empire Tianxia, of course, stands for the loose... Guiles. Empire Tianxia, of course, stands for the loose confederacy of states into which China was divided under the Zhou dynasty. The belligerent who holds this dominating position can constrain most of them to become his allies. He Yangtze, the king of Wu, asked Master Sun, I know that on crossroad ground one must arrive first, but suppose we are distant from the place and set off later than the enemy. Suppose we cannot arrive there first, however hard we drive our horses and chariots. What should we do then? Master Sun replied, What is meant by crossroad ground is a place where we face the enemy, and at the same time there are other states on each side like a crossroads. The first to take it is in fact the first party to send envoys with heavy bribes to negotiate alliances with the neighboring states to establish a friendly relationship. If we have achieved this, then even if our troops arrive later than the enemy's, we will have solid support and our enemy will be without allies. Our allies will beat the drum and attack him, and he will take fright and be at his wits' end. When an army enters enemy territory deeply and holds several fortified towns in its rear, that is heavy ground. Cao, ground that is difficult to retreat from. Wang Zi, when an invading army has reached such a point, its situation is serious, heavy. Li Quan, in such a situation the resolve is firm, as when the great Qin general Bo Qi d. 257 BC invaded Chu 278 BC, and when Yu Yi, minister of the state of Wei, invaded Gi 284 BC. These were both cases of being on heavy ground. Yeah, it's like you already took a bunch of pieces and you already like gotten deep into, like your enemy has came to your territory and gotten deeply into your territory. He Yangtze, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. Suppose we have led our troops deep into enemy territory and our lines of supply have been broken. Even if we want to, our situation is such that we cannot retreat. What must we do to nourish ourselves on the enemy and not face defeat? Master Sun replied, On heavy ground, officers and men are courageous, and even if supplies are cut off, they can resort to pillage. Booty acquired by inferior ranks should be collected by the commanding officers. Those who have acquired most should be well rewarded. In this way, the men will not think of retreating, and if they do show signs of weakening, they must be forbidden to have such thoughts. Meanwhile, build deep moats and strong fortifications, demonstrate the intention of a long stay. If the enemy, under cover of opening up the roads, tries to destroy our lines of communication, send out fast, light chariots and bait him with the offer of cattle and horses. If he comes out, then beat the drums and follow him. Meanwhile, lay in ambush and, at the time designated, fall on him from both sides. He will surely be defeated. When an army travels through mountains and forests, cliffs and crags, marshes and fens, hard roads, these are intractable ground. Cao, they contain little that is solid. Jialin, this is ground that has been ruined by the passage of water. Mei Yao Chin, such ground is hard to traverse, let alone fight on. He Yangtze, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. Suppose we are on intractable ground among mountains and rivers, cliffs and crags, on hard roads, our men exhausted after a long march. Suppose the enemy is up ahead, has set ambushes behind us, is encamped to our left, and has taken up positions to our right. His finest chariots and cavalry hold the pass against us. What are we to do then? Master Sun replied, Send the light chariots 3 or 4 miles ahead of the main body of your troops. They are to lie in wait for the enemy. Observe him in the pass, dividing into a left and a right detachment. Your commanding general, meanwhile, keeps a close eye on all directions and chooses an empty moment, a moment of weakness on the part of the enemy, to strike. The various divisions then all come together and continue to harry the enemy until he is exhausted. Master Sun would have been good at chess, huh? Ground reached through narrow gorges, retreated from by twisting paths, where a smaller force of theirs can strike our larger one, that is enclosed ground. Li Quan, action and movement are hard. Du Mu, here both arrival and departure are difficult, but it is easy to lay ambushes, and one can be utterly defeated. This was before guns, by the way. He Yangtze, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. Suppose we are on enclosed ground with a powerful foe ahead of us and dangerous passes behind. The enemy has cut our supply lines and is trying to provoke us into flight. Meanwhile, he beats his drums and makes a loud noise without actually advancing in order to observe our resources for battle. What should we do then? Master Sun replied. On enclosed ground, close the passes to show that there is no way out. Then the army must become the family. All minds must be as one and all strengths united. For several days extinguish fire so that there is no sign of smoke. This presents the outer form of utter chaos and weakness. The enemy, seeing this, will scoff at us, will slacken and lower his state of preparedness. Then we boost our own troops' morale. We stir up their resolve, lay ambushes with our crack troops in the defiles and ravines on each side, and break out our main force with much beating of drums. If the enemy opposes us, we will attack with all our might, assaulting him from front, rear, and sides. The king asked again, suppose the enemy comes upon us on enclosed ground, and himself lays ambushes and develops cunning schemes, lures us, perplexes us, with much waving of flags and noise and confusion, so that we do not know which direction he is going in. What then? Master Sun replied. Let 1,000 men wield banners. Let them divide into parties and block the strategic roads. Let light troops advance and challenge the enemy. Let them draw up their ranks without actually attacking. If the enemy engages them, let them not retreat. This is the way to defeat their strategy. Ground where mere survival requires a desperate struggle, where without a desperate struggle we perish. That is death ground. Cow. A high mountain stands in front, a large river runs behind. Advance is impossible, retreat is denied. Li Quan, blocked by mountains to the front and rivers to the rear, with supplies exhausted. In this situation, it is advantageous to act swiftly and dangerous to procrastinate. Chen Hao, Giles, to be on death ground is like sitting in a leaking boat, like crouching in a burning house. Du Mu, Duke Li, had this to say about the death ground. Suppose our army invades enemy territory and fails to avail itself of local guides. It therefore falls into a deadly trap and is at the enemy's mercy. To the left plunges a ravine, to the right soars a mountain. The road is so precipitous that the horses have to be tied together and the chariots transported on ropes. There was no passage either in the front or behind. There was no choice but to proceed in single file. Before our men can form ranks, the enemy suddenly appears in force. It is equally impossible to advance or to retreat. We seek battle, but in vain. We adopt a defensive stance, but are constantly hard-pressed. If we stay put, days and months will go by. If we make a move, we will be attacked front and rear. This wilderness offers neither water to drink nor grass for fodder. The troops are without supplies. The horses are worn out. We are exhausted and at the very end of our wits and strength. The pass is so narrow that a single man can hold it against 10,000. The enemy holds every strategic advantage. We have lost every strategic initiative. Even suppose we had the finest soldiers and the sharpest weapons, how could we turn such a situation to our advantage? He Yangzi, the king of Wu, asked for Master Sun's advice. Suppose our troops have crossed the frontier and are on enemy territory. Now the enemy arrives in great numbers and surrounds us with a double cordon of troops. If we want to break out, we find every way blocked. We need to raise the men's morale and steel them for a last desperate stand. In order to break the net, what should we do? Master Sun replied. Dig deep the moats of your camp and build high its fortifications. Make a show of being well dug in. Then stay put, do not make a move. Conceal your potential. Make a speech to the men, invoking the desperate situation. Kill the oxen, burn the chariots, and hold a feast for the men. Burn your reserves of grain, fill your wells, and level your ovens to the ground. Cut the men's hair, shred their hats, show that you have no other plan but to fight to the death. Thus you will fill your men with the resolve of despair. Polish your armor, sharpen your swords, and unite your men in a single surge of morale. Attack the enemy from both sides at once. Make a terrible din in beating the drums of war. The enemy will take fright, incapable of withstanding this ferocious assault. Meanwhile, your shocked troops will attack separately from the enemy's rear. This is called snatching salvation from despair. Hence the saying, he who is in dire straits and can find no stratagem is lost. He who is lost and cannot fight to the death is finished. The king of Wu went on to ask, suppose our troops have surrounded the enemy. What then? Master Sun replied, steep mountains and valleys hard to traverse. Bring the enemy to bay. Here is how we must be attacked. Hide your men in an ambush and open a way for the enemy to retreat by. He will seek safety and retreat and will lose the will to fight. Attack him then, and despite his superiority in numbers, he will be destroyed. A long chapter. Really long. On scattering ground, do not fight. Li Quan, for fear that the men will scatter and flee. On light ground, do not halt. Li Quan, for fear that they will flee. On strategic ground, do not attack. Cao Cao, do not attack, but concentrate on being the first to occupy the advantage. Li Quan, if the enemy has occupied the key position first, attack is out of the question. On open ground, do not block. Guiles, because the attempt would be futile and would expose the blocking force itself to serious risks. On crossroad ground, form alliances. On heavy ground, plunder. Du Mu, when an army occupies heavy ground, there is no gain to be had in advancing further, and retreat is impossible. One must therefore bring in grain for a protracted resistance and keep a close watch on the enemy. Guiles, on this, Li Quan has the following delicious note. When an army penetrates far into the enemy's country, care must be taken not to alienate the people by unjust treatment. Follow the example of the Han Emperor Gaozu, whose march into Qin territory was marked by no violation of women or looting of valuables. Nota bene, this was in 207 BC and may well cause us to blush for the Christian armies that entered Peking in AD 1900. Thus he won the hearts of all. In the present passage, then I think the true reading must be not plunder, but do not plunder. Alas, I fear that in this instance the worthy commentator's feelings outran his judgment. Du Mu has no such allusions. Translator. The contemporary Chinese scholar Wu Jiulong, 1990, makes the same observation as Giles. Li's explanation, which is directly contrary to that of all the other commentators, expresses a worthy point of view, but is not, I fear, in line with Master Sun's own thinking. On intractable ground, keep marching. On enclosed ground, devise stratagems. Cao Cao, try out some indirect, unusual stratagem. Do you, Giles, in such a position, some cunning scheme must be devised to fit the circumstances, and if we can succeed in deceiving the enemy, the danger may be averted. Giles, this is exactly what happened on the famous occasions when Hannibal was hemmed in among the mountains on the road to Casilinum, and to all appearances entrapped by the dictator Fabius. The stratagem which Hannibal devised to baffle his foes was remarkably like that which Tian Dan had also employed with success exactly 62 years before. See chapter 9. When night came on, bundles of twigs were fastened to the horns of some 2,000 oxen and set on fire, the terrified animals being then quickly driven along the mountainside towards the passes which were beset by the enemy. The strange spectacle of these rapidly moving lights so alarmed and discomfited the Romans that they withdrew from their position, and Hannibal's army passed safely through the defile. This is a long chapter. Peace. Alright guys, we're continuing on chapter 11, The Art of War, with commentary. The 9 kinds of ground. On death ground fight. Jia Lin, Giles. Fight with all your might and you may live. Cling to your corner and you will die. The skillful warrior of old could prevent the enemy's vanguard from linking with his rear. Large and small divisions from working together, crack troops from helping poor troops, officers and men from supporting one another. The enemy, once separated, could not reassemble. Once united, could not act in concert. Mang, He, the skillful warrior, launched several deceptive maneuvers. He was seen in the west and appeared out of the east. He lured his enemy in the north and attacked him in the south. He made him crazy and confused him so that his forces dispersed in disarray and could not be reassembled. Zhang Yu. He took his enemy unawares, launching surprise attacks. He struck him suddenly with shock troops. The enemy came to the rescue of its vanguard and left its rear exposed. He responded on the left and created an opening on the right. The result was general panic and confusion, disorder and disintegration. Mei Yao Chen. If already separated, they were unable to reunite. If already united, they were unable to act together. When there was some gain to be had, he made a move. When there was none, he halted. To the question, how should we confront an enemy, numerous and well-arrayed, poised to attack? My reply is, seize something he cherishes and he will do your will. Cao Cao. Seize some strategic advantage he depends on. Chen Hao. This refers not just to strategic advantages, but to any person or thing of importance to the enemy. Guiles. By boldly seizing the initiative in this way, you at once throw the other side on the defensive. Translator. Julian puts this well, P166, instead of accepting a direct engagement with the enemy, which would be dangerous in these circumstances, one must begin by destructing him, disconcerting him, destabilizing him. Speed is the essence of war. Exploit the enemy's unpreparedness and attack him unawares. Take an unexpected route. Du Mu. This is the essence of war, to exploit the enemy's weakness. To attack the enemy unawares, taking an unexpected route, is a profound truth of war and the secret of the general's art. He Yangtze. When the Wei general Meng Da was plotting to betray his state and go over to the house of Shu in AD 227, the Wei general Sima Yi got wind of his intended treachery and made a forced march to Xingcheng, where Meng was governor, covering the 400-odd miles in 8 days. In taking this decision, he ignored the advice of his officers, who thought it more prudent to investigate the matter carefully first. Meng is a man of no principles, said Sima, and we should deal with him at once while he is still hesitating. Meng had indeed reckoned that it would be at least a month before anything happened. He was caught unawares. Xingcheng was taken and Meng himself executed. A second example of the efficacy of speed is that of the great Tang general Duke Li Jing, when he put down the rebel Xiao Xian in Hubei. He set off from Sichuan and sailed down the Yangtze gorges, taking Xiao completely by surprise. In war, said Duke Li in his own Art of War, speed is of the essence. The way of invasion is this: deep penetration brings cohesion. Your enemy will not prevail. Plunder fertile country to nourish your men. Cherish your troops. Wang Zi Giles. Fuss over them. Humor them. Give them plenty of food and drink and look after them generally. Do not wear them out. Nurture your energy. Concentrate it. Du Mu. If your energy is whole and your strength abundant, victory will be yours from the very outset. Exploit changing circumstances and keep your plans dark and inscrutable. Chen Hao Giles. In 224 BC, Wang Jian, the famous general whose military genius contributed largely to the success of the first emperor of Qin, had invaded the state of Chu, where a universal levy was made to oppose him, but being doubtful of the temper of his troops, he declined all invitations to fight and remained strictly on the defensive. Day after day, Wang kept inside his walls and would not come out, but devoted all his time and energy to winning the affection and confidence of his men. He took care that they should be well fed, sharing his own meals with them. He provided facilities for bathing and employed every method of judicious indulgence to weld them into a loyal and homogeneous body. After some time had elapsed, he told certain persons to find out how the men were amusing themselves. The answer was that they were contending with one another in putting the weight and long jumping. When Wang Jian heard that they were engaged in these athletic pursuits, he knew that their spirits had been raised to the required pitch and that they were now ready for fighting. By this time, the Chu army, after repeating their challenge again and again, had marched away eastwards in disgust. The king general immediately struck camp and followed them, and in the battle that ensued they were routed with great slaughter. Shortly afterward the whole of Chu was conquered by Qin, and the Chu king was led into captivity. Move your men about, Giles, in order that the enemy may never know exactly where you are. Devise stratagems that cannot be fathomed. Throw your men where there is no escape, and they will die rather than flee. Men who have faced death can achieve anything. Zhang Yu, Giles, Master Wei Liao said, supposing one man were to run amok with a sword in the marketplace and everybody else try to get out of his way, it would not be that this man alone had courage and that all the rest were cowards. The truth is, a desperado, literally a man who must die, will always defeat a man who still sets some value on his life, literally a man who must live. They will give their last drop of strength, officers and men alike. Troops in desperate straits know no fear. Where there is no escape, they stand firm. When they have entered deep, they persist. When they see no hope, they fight. Li Quan, to the death. They are alert without needing discipline. They act without needing instructions. They are devoted without needing a compact. They are loyal without needing orders. Forbid the consulting of omens. Cast out doubts, and they will go on to the death. Du Mu, Giles. Lord Yellowstone said spells and incantations should be strictly forbidden, and no officer allowed to inquire by divination into the fortunes of an army, for fear the soldiers' minds should be seriously perturbed. The meaning is that if all doubts and scruples are thus cast aside, your men will never falter in their resolution until they die. Our men have no excess of worldly goods, and yet they do not disdain wealth. They do not expect to live long, and yet they do not disdain long life. Wang Zi, they have what they need and no more. If officers and men cared too much for worldly riches, they would cherish life at all cost. As it is, they fight to the death. If they had too much thought for self-preservation, they would have no will to fight. Zhang Yu, wealth and long life are things that all men cherish. So if they burn or throw away valuable possessions and sacrifice their own lives, it is not that they dislike them, but simply that they see no choice in the matter. On the day they are ordered into battle, they sit up and weep, wetting their clothes with their tears. They lie down and weep, wetting their cheeks, cow, because they are all resolved to die. Du Mu, they all have made a compact with death. Before the day of battle, the order is issued. Today's affair depends upon this one act. If you do not put your lives at stake, your bodies will fertilize the fields and be carrion for the birds and beasts. Zhang Yu, Giles, such is their emotion, as at the mournful parting at the river Yi between Jin Kai and his friends, when the former was sent to attempt the life of the king of Qin, afterward the first emperor in 227 BC. The tears of all flowed down like rain as he bade them farewell and uttered the following lines. The shrill blast is blowing, chilly the burn, your champion is going, not to return. Giles, we may remember that the heroes of the Iliad were equally childlike in showing their emotion. But throw them where there is no escape, and they will fight with the courage of the heroes of Zhu and Gi. Throw them where there is no escape. Okay, so Giles / Records of the Grand Historian. Sun-Tzu was a native of the state of Wu and a contemporary of Master Sun himself. He was employed by Ganzing Guang, later to become King He Lu, to assassinate his sovereign Wang Liao with a dagger that he secreted in the belly of a fish served up at a banquet. He succeeded in his attempt, but was himself immediately hacked to pieces by the king's bodyguard. This was in 515 BC. The other hero referred to, Cao Gi, performed the exploit which has made his name famous 166 years earlier in 681 BC. The state of Lu had been thrice defeated by Qi and was just about to conclude a treaty surrendering a large slice of territory, when Cao Gi suddenly seized Lord Huan, the Duke of Gi, as he stood on the altar steps and held a dagger against his chest. None of the Duke's retainers dared to move a muscle, and Cao Gi proceeded to demand full restitution, declaring that Lu was being unjustly treated because she was a smaller and weaker state. Lord Huan, in peril of his life, was obliged to consent, whereupon Cao Gi flung away his dagger and quietly resumed his place amid the terrified assemblage without having so much as changed color. The skillful warrior deploys his troops like the Shuaran snake found on Mount Hang. Mei Yao Chin, swift reactions and responses. Zhang Yu, Shuai means swift, strike it, and it retaliates swiftly. This is a figure of battle formation. In the diagram of the 8 formations we read, front is rear, rear is front, in every direction, each extremity is the head. Strike the belly, and head and tail both come to the rescue. Translator, the 8 formations, although not mentioned by Master Sun himself, made up the classic repertoire of battle formations. Their invention was attributed to various ancient figures, from the legendary Yellow Emperor to Suj Liang, the sleeping dragon, according to the description in the Taibo Yingqing, written by Li Quan, the Tang commentator on the art of war. The formations were divided among the 8 trigrams. 4 fell under the yin category and 4 under yang. Their names were heaven, earth, wind, clouds, flying dragon, winged tiger, soaring bird, curling snake. Strike its head and the tail lashes back. Strike its tail and the head fights back. Strike its belly and both head and tail will attack you. To the question, can an army be like the Shuaran snake? Mei Yao Chin, in other words, is it possible to make the front and the rear of an army react swiftly, Shuairan, to an attack on the other, as though they were parts of a single snake-like body? I reply, yes it can. The men of Wu and the men of Yu, they are enemies, but if they cross a river in the same boat and encounter a wind, they will help each other like right hand and left. Mei Yao Chin, this is the underlying dynamic of the situation. Giles, the meaning is, if 2 enemies will help each other in a time of common peril, how much more should 2 parts of the same army, bound together as they are by every tie of interest and fellow feeling? Yet it is notorious that many a campaign has been ruined through lack of cooperation, especially in the case of allied armies. It is not enough to tether horses and to bury chariot wheels. Giles, these quaint devices to prevent one's army from running away recall the Athenian hero Cephanus, who carried an anchor with him at the battle of Plataea, by means of which he fastened himself firmly to one spot. See Herodotus the 4th, 7-4, or the 9th, 7-4. It is not enough, says Master Sun, to render flight impossible by such mechanical means. You will not succeed unless your men have tenacity and unity of purpose, and above all, a spirit of sympathetic cooperation. This is a lesson which can be learned from the Shuaran. Translator, Brigadier General Griffith makes a more modern comparison. Such Maginot-Line expedients are not in themselves sufficient to prevent troops from fleeing. There must be a single courage throughout. This is the way to manage an army. There must be a single courage throughout. This is the way to manage an army. Strong and weak both can serve, thanks to the principle of ground. Mei Yao Chen, both strong and weak can be used, thanks to the underlying dynamic of the ground or terrain. Translator, or as Brigadier General Smith puts it in his paraphrase of Zhang Yu, the difference in quality of troops can be balanced by careful sector assignment. Weak troops can hold strong ground, but might break if put in a position less strong. Other commentators take this to mean that one can make use of both strong or hard and weak or soft features of the terrain. According to this interpretation, hard is yang, soft is yin. The skillful warrior directs his army as if it were a single man. He leaves it no choice but to obey. Niu and Wang, 1990, the reason they are so united and so easy to command is that they find themselves in a situation or on a terrain where they have no option other than to fight. It is the business of the general to be still and inscrutable, to be upright and impartial. He must be able to keep his own troops in ignorance, to deceive their eyes and their ears. Cao Cao, the troops can share in the joy of completion, but not in the travail of conception. Zhang Yu, as the hermit of the evening star put it, in war deception is to be prized, and it is not just the enemy that must be deceived, but one's own men too. They must be enabled to follow, but not to understand. The Way and Its Power, chapter 65. In the days of old, those who practiced Tao with success did not thereby enlighten the people, but on the contrary sought to make them ignorant. Translator. Giles quotes Colonel Henderson. The infinite pains with which Stonewall Jackson, American Confederate general, 1824 through 63, sought to conceal even from his most trusted field officers his movements, his intentions, and his thoughts, a commander less thorough would have pronounced useless. Giles' History of the Later Han. In the year AD 88, Ban Chao took to the field with 25,000 men from Khatan and other Central Asian states with the object of crushing Yarkand. His victory in this campaign was due to the fact that he not only kept his own officers in ignorance of his real plans, but he actually took the bold step of dividing his army in order to deceive the enemy. He changes his ways and alters his plans to keep the enemy in ignorance. He shifts camps and takes roundabout routes to keep the enemy in the dark. He leads his men into battle like a man climbing a height and kicking away the ladder. He leads them deep into the territory of the feudal lords and releases the trigger. Zhang Yu. Kicking away the ladder makes advance possible and retreat impossible. Releasing the trigger means one can go forward and not backward. This was what Zhang Yu did when he sank his ships after crossing the river. He burns his boats, he breaks his pots, he is like a shepherd driving his sheep this way and that. No one knows where he is going. Du Mu. The men are aware of their orders to advance and retreat, but they know nothing of the goal of the offensive. Translator. He keeps them in the dark so that he can exploit to the full the potential of the situation. Julian P. 177. This same idea was applied in the political domain, where it formed part of the classical tradition of despotism, misnamed legalism, of which 20th century Chinese totalitarianism is the direct heir. Citizens were to be treated like so many automata. He assembles his troops and throws them into danger. This is the business of the commander. Let me write that word down, automata. Automata. He assembles his troops and throws them into danger. This is the business of the commander. Giles. Master Sun means that after mobilization, there should be no delay in aiming a blow at the enemy's heart. Compare with his earlier statement in this chapter. Throw your men where there is no escape, and they will die rather than flee. Note how he returns again and again to this point. Among the warring states of ancient China, desertion was no doubt a much more present fear and serious evil than it is in the armies of today. These things must be studied, the variations of the 9 kinds of ground. Zhang Yu. One must not be hidebound in interpreting the rules for the 9 kinds of ground and how to respond to them. The advantages of flexible maneuver. Giles. The saying retreat in order to advance almost exactly corresponds to the French il faut reculer pour mieux sauter. The principles of human nature. Cow. It is, for example, human nature to advance toward gain and to retreat from harm. The way of invasion is this. Deep penetration brings cohesion. Shallow penetration brings scattering. Translator. If these recurring references to deep penetration are beginning to sound like one of the Taoist or pseudo-Taoist sex handbooks, we should not be surprised. The two genres, art of war, art of love, share a lot of vocabulary and ideas. The introduction for a brief discussion of this, Robert Van Gulik, Erotic Color Prints of the Ming Period, p. 113, gives a telling example from the Jiji Zhang Jing, the true classic of the complete union, a late Ming sex handbook. The penultimate paragraph of the main text describing the climax of the sexual battle reads, I am in no hurry, but the enemy, the female partner, is hard-pressed for time. One is almost tempted to translate at bay and throws his entire force into the battle. The arms clash as I advance and withdraw at will, using the enemy's food and exhausting his supplies. Then I practice the tactics of the turtle, the dragon, the serpent, and the tiger. The enemy surrenders his arms, and I gather the fruits of victory. This is called Gigi. After completion, the name of the penultimate hexagram in the Book of Changes, ensuring peace for 1 generation. I withdraw from the battlefield and dismiss my soldiers. I rest quietly to regain my strength. I convey the booty to the storeroom, thereby increasing my power to the height of strength. The commentary explains, throw his entire force into the battle, as meaning that the woman's passion reaches its apex. After completion, i.e. after orgasm, I continue pushing my member in and out, alternating deep and shallow strokes according to the prescribed method. The commentator continues, using the enemy's food means sucking her tongue. Exhausting his supplies means pressing her breasts. Then the woman sheds her true essence completely, and I have obtained the true yang. Withdrawing from the battlefield means descending from the horse. I'm going to read that book. What's it called? Art of Love. Okay, when you leave your own territory and lead your men across the border, you enter dire terrain. Mei Yao Chin, this is somewhere between light and scattering ground, less far forward than light but farther than scattering. Wang Zi Giles, this is terrain separated from home by a third state whose territory we have had to cross in order to reach it. We must complete our business there quickly. When there are lines of communication on all four sides, you are on crossroad terrain. When you penetrate deeply, you are on heavy terrain. When you penetrate superficially, you are on light terrain. When there are strongholds to your rear and narrow passes in front, you are on enclosed terrain. When there is no way out, you are on death terrain. Zhang Yu, there is nowhere to escape to on the left or right, in front or behind. On scattering ground, we unite the will of our men. Du Mu, remain on the defensive, and their will is united. Engage battle, as they scatter easily. On light ground, we keep them connected. Du Mu, Giles, first, to guard against the desertion of our own troops, and second, against a sudden attack by the enemy. On strategic ground, we bring up our rear. Zhu Yu, Giles, we must quickly bring up our rear so that head and tail may both reach the goal. Giles, that is, they must not be allowed to straggle a long way apart. On open ground, we see to our defenses. Wang Zi, Giles, fearing a surprise attack. On crossroad ground, we strengthen our alliances. On heavy ground, we ensure continuity of supplies. Giles, the commentators take this as referring to forage and plunder, not, as one might expect, to an unbroken communication with home base. On intractable ground, we keep on the move. Cao, move along swiftly. On enclosed ground, we block the passes. Main Giles, to make it seem that we are defending the position when in fact we are planning to burst suddenly through enemy lines. Mei Yao Chin, we close off escape routes in order to make our soldiers fight with the fierceness of desperation. Wang Zi, we are afraid that our men will be tempted to run away. Du Mu, Giles, History of the Northern Qi Dynasty. In AD 532, Gao Huan, afterward Emperor of the Northern Qi Dynasty, was surrounded by a great army under Erzu Zhao and others. His own force was comparatively small, consisting only of 2,000 horse and something under 30,000 foot. There were gaps in the lines of surrounding army, but Gao Huan, instead of trying to escape, actually blocked all the gaps with oxen and donkeys tied together. As a result, his men fought with the courage of despair and carried the day. On death ground, we demonstrate the desperateness of the situation. Do you burn your baggage, throw away your provisions, fill your wells, level your stoves, and make it plain to your men that they cannot survive, but must fight to the death. Mei Yao Chin, survival arises from looking death in the face. It is in the soldier's nature that when surrounded, he resists. When all seems lost, he struggles on. When in danger, he obeys orders. Zhang Yu, Giles, History of the Latter Han. In a perilous position, he obeys every order. Ben Chao, AD 31 through 101, his brother, the historian Ban Gu, wrote the history of the former Han, arrived at Shanshan, a non-Chinese Central Asian kingdom, an oasis state situated between Dunhuang and Khotan, in AD 73. Kuang, the king of the country, received him at first with great politeness and respect, but shortly afterward his behavior underwent a sudden change, and he became remiss and negligent. Ban Chao spoke about this to the officers of his suite. Have you noticed that Kuang's polite intentions are on the wane? This must signify that envoys have come from the northern barbarians, and that consequently he is in a state of indecision, not knowing with which side to throw in his lot. That surely is the reason. The truly wise man, we are told, can perceive things before they have come to pass. How much more then can he perceive those that are already manifest? Thereupon he called one of the natives who had been assigned to his service, and set a trap for him, saying, "Where are those envoys from the Xian Nu who arrived some days ago?" The man was so taken aback with surprise and fear that he presently blurted out the whole truth. Ban Chao, keeping his informant carefully under lock and key, then summoned a gathering of his officers, 36 in all, and began drinking with them. When the wine had gone to their heads a little, he tried to rouse their spirits still further by addressing them thus: Gentlemen, here we are in the heart of an isolated region, anxious to receive riches and honor by some great exploit. Now it happens that an ambassador from Sun-Tzu arrived in this kingdom only a few days ago, and the result is that the respectful courtesy extended toward us by our royal host has disappeared. Should this envoy prevail upon him to seize our party and hand us over to Sun-Tzu, our bones will become food for the wolves of the desert. What are we to do? With one accord, the officers replied, standing as we do in peril of our lives, we will follow our commander to the death. For the sequel of this adventure, see the beginning of chapter 12. Without knowing the plans of the feudal lords, you cannot form alliances. Without knowing the lie of the hills and woods, of cliffs and crags, of marshes and fens, you cannot march. Without using local guides, you cannot exploit the lie of the land. Guiles. With regard to local guides, Masterson might have added that there was always a risk of going wrong, either through their treachery or some misunderstanding, such as Livy records 22nd 13. Hannibal, we are told, ordered a guide to lead him into the neighborhood of Casanum, where there was an important pass to be occupied, but this Carthaginian accent, unsuited to the pronunciation of Latin names, caused the guide to understand Casillinum instead of Casanum, and turning from his proper route, he took the army in that direction, the mistake not being discovered until they had almost arrived. Ignorance of any one of these points, the advantages and disadvantages attendant on the 9 kinds of ground. Ignorance of any one of these points is not characteristic of the army of a great king. Giles, Ba Wang, one who rules by force, or hegemon, was a term specially used for those princes who established their hegemony over other feudal states. During the spring and autumn period, the famous 5 great kings of the 7th century were Duke Huan of Gi, Duke Wen of Jin, Duke Xiang of Song, Prince Zuang of Chu, and Duke Mu of Qin. When the army of a great king attacks a powerful state, he does not allow the enemy to concentrate his forces. He overawes the enemy and undermines his alliances. He does not strive to ally himself with all the other states. He does not foster their power. He pursues his own secret designs, overawing his enemy. Li Kuan, he can afford to reject entangling alliances and simply pursue his own secret designs, his prestige enabling him to dispense with external friendships. Thus he can capture the enemy's cities and destroy the enemy's states. Giles, this paragraph, though written many years before the Qin state became a serious menace, is not a bad summary of the policy by which the famous 6 chancellors gradually paved the way for the final triumph under Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin, who died in 210 BC. Distribute rewards without undue respect for rules. Publish orders without undue regard for precedent. Wang Zi, Giles, in order to prevent treachery. Giles, the marshal's treatise says, give instructions only on sighting the enemy. Give rewards only for deserving deeds. Your final instructions should not correspond with those previously posted up. Zhang Yu, your arrangements should not be divulged beforehand. Jia Lin, your rules and arrangements should be fixed. Translator, as Brigadier General Griffith summarizes, observing that the verse is obviously out of place, the general in the field need not follow prescribed procedures or customary law in respect to administration of his army. Deal with a whole army as if it were a single man. Apply them to their task without words of explanation. Giles, Lord Mansfield once told a junior colleague to give no reasons for his decisions, and the maxim is even more applicable to a general than to a judge. Confront them with the advantage, but do not explain the danger. Throw them into perilous ground, and they will survive. Plunge them into death ground, and they will live. He Yangzi, Giles' History of the Foreign Yan. In 204 BC, the Han general Hong Xing was sent against the army of Zhao and halted 10 miles from the mouth of the Jingxing Pass, where the enemy had mustered in full force. Here at midnight he detached a body of 2,000 light cavalry, every man of which was furnished with a red flag. Their instructions were to make their way through narrow defiles and keep a secret watch on the enemy. When the men of Zhao see me in full flight, Han Xing said, they will abandon their fortifications and give chase. This must be the sign for you to rush in, pluck down the Zhao standards, and set up the red banners of Han in their stead. Turning then to his other officers, he remarked, "Our adversary holds a strong position and is not likely to come out and attack us until he sees the banner and drums of the commander-in-chief, for fear I should turn back and escape through the mountains." So saying, he first of all sent out a division consisting of 10,000 men and ordered them to form in line a battle with their backs to the river. Seeing this maneuver, the whole army of Zhao broke into loud laughter. By this time it was broad daylight, and Hong Xin, displaying the generalissimo's flag, marched out of the pass with drums beating and was immediately engaged by the enemy. A great battle followed, lasting for some time, until at length Hong Xin and his colleague Zhang Ni, leaving drums and banner on the field, fled to the division on the river bank, where another fierce battle was raging. The enemy rushed out to pursue them and to secure the trophies, thus denuding their ramparts of men, but the two generals succeeded in joining the other army, which was fighting with the utmost desperation. The time had now come for the 2,000 horsemen to play their part. As soon as they saw the men of Zhao following up their advantage, they galloped behind the deserted walls, tore up the enemy's flags, and replaced them with those of Han. When the Zhao army turned back from the pursuit, the sight of these red flags struck them with terror. Convinced that the Hans had got in and overpowered their king, they broke up in wild disorder, every effort of their leader to stay the panic being in vain. Then the Han army fell on them from both sides and completed the rout, killing a great number and capturing the rest, among whom was King Ya himself. After the battle, some of Hong Xing's officers came to him and said, "In the art of war, we are told to have a hill or tumulus on the right rear and a river or marsh on the left front. This appears to be a blend of Master Sun, Chapter 9, and the Grand Duke. You, on the contrary, ordered us to draw up our troops with the river at our back. Under these conditions, how did we manage to gain the victory?" The general replied, "I fear you gentlemen have not studied the art of war with sufficient care. Is it not written there, 'Plunge your men into death ground and they will live, throw them into perilous ground and they will survive'? Had I taken the usual course, I should never have been able to bring any colleagues around. What says the military classic? Swoop down on the marketplace and drive the men off to fight. This passage does not occur in the present text of Master Sun. If I had not placed my troops in a position where they were obliged to fight for their lives, but had allowed each man to follow his own discretion, there would have been a general dabandad, a rout, and it would have been impossible to do anything with them." The officers admitted the force of his argument and said, These are higher tactics than we should have been capable of." Translator. This story has already been told in brief in Chapter 4, where Li Quan uses it to illustrate Hong Xin's uncommon skill as a general. When a force has fallen into danger, it can snatch victory from defeat. Mei Yao Qin. Until it has fallen into danger, its will is not sufficiently concentrated. Translator. Giles has another characteristically Edwardian comment here. Danger has a bracing effect. Success in war lies in scrutinizing enemy intentions and going with them. Cao. If he shows an inclination to advance, lay an ambush for him and retreat. If he seems anxious to retreat, then set out and attack him. Zhang Yu. Giles. If the enemy shows an inclination to advance, lure him on to do so. If he seems anxious to retreat, delay so that he can do so. Translator. Another interpretation reads this as, "And in feigning to go along with them." Focus on the enemy, and from hundreds of miles you can kill their general. This is success through cunning. On the day you decide to attack, close the passes, destroy the allies. Giles, the special kind used as city gates and on the frontier, tablets of bamboo or wood, one half of which was issued as a permit or passport by the official in charge of a gate. When this half was returned to him, within a fixed period, he was authorized to open the gate and let the traveler through. Break off intercourse with envoys. Be firm in the temple council for the execution of your plans. Translator. See Chapter 1. If the enemy opens the door, rush in. Seize what he holds dear and secretly contrive an encounter. Chen Hao. If we manage to seize a favorable position but the enemy does not come, the advantage cannot be exploited. He who wishes to take a position that the enemy holds dear must begin by contriving a secret encounter with the enemy and inveigle him into going there. Mei Yao Qin. This subtly contrived encounter is achieved through the enemy's own spies, who will carry back certain information. We must then succeed in arriving before the enemy, even though we may have set off after him. We must set off after him in order to ensure that he arrives. We must arrive first in order to seize what he holds dear. Discard rules, Cao, as defined by rule and compass. Jianlin, victory is all that matters, and this cannot be achieved by following set rules. Giles, Napoleon, as we know according to the veterans of the old school whom he defeated, won his battles by violating every accepted canon of warfare. Translator, as all previous translators concur, this passage is hopelessly corrupt. I have followed Jianlin's emendation. Follow the enemy to fight the decisive battle. Do move, fall in with the enemy's disposition, and when the dynamic of the situation offers a favorable opportunity, come out for the decisive battle. At first be like a maiden. Amiat, avant que la campagne commence, soyez comme un coin filet que ne sort pas de la maison. Elle s'occupe des affaires du ménage, elle a soin de tout préparer, elle voit tout, elle entend tout, elle sait tout, elle ne se mêle de aucune affaire in appearance, or in apparence. Before the campaign begins, be like a young girl who never leaves the house. She looks after the household, she takes care to prepare everything. She sees everything, hears everything, knows everything, but to outward appearance, she is utterly uninvolved. When the enemy opens the door, be swift as a hare. Before the campaign begins, be like a young girl who never leaves the house. She looks after the household. She takes care to prepare everything. She sees everything, hears everything, knows everything, but to outward appearance, she is utterly uninvolved. When the enemy opens the door, be swift as a hare. Amiat, la campagne, une fois commencée, vous devez avoir la promptitude d'un livre qui, se trouvant poursuivi par des chasseurs, tâchera parmi de tours de trouver enfin seguite pour suivre. When the campaign has begun, you must react as swiftly as a hare, who, finding himself pursued by hunters, strives by 1,000 twists and turns to find his way back to the refuge of his dwelling. Your enemy will not withstand you. That's a long chapter. Peace.